So, having computer issues, I don't really know why. I cannot find my Zoom recording. So, I'm going to do this for now. Here we are with the program evaluation uh, proposal. I'm going to start with them. So, we're looking at again domestic violence as a cultural and uh, family issue, not as an individual issue. So, we look into this, and what I found is almost all the research I could find was on correcting domestic abuse and violence as opposed to preventing domestic abuse and violence, which is most of our thing, right? We don't have gang prevention in dominant culture America. We have let's put gangsters in jail. And of course, with gangs, children need to feel safe and need to belong. If you don't feel safe and you don't belong, anybody can come along and say, you belong to us. We will protect you if you follow our rules. And you get police or gangs or church groups or um, sports teams. So, so there's an idea. I think a paradigm we have to break down. I was listening to an interview with a person whose job was to de-radicalize terrorists, and he talked about people as human beings with behaviors that didn't fit in or did fit in with the paradigm, right? So we have soldiers that go to Iraq and kill strangers, and that's okay. Why? The dominant paradigm is that Saddam Hussein is a bad person who deliberately and purposely attacked the United States in 2001. So we need to go and take over that country because uh, they're bad people too, because they have this leader. And of course, here's a super interesting issue around all of these is if the dominant culture believes this violence is okay, then it's okay in practice. And we had a lot of people were killed in Iraq. It turns out that's it didn't make things any better for anybody. Um, so we have domestic violence, which was acceptable as controlling of the behavior of your property. We still, I work with horses, and horses, if they disobey, they have no, first of all, the horse has no agency over what rules they have to follow or how they can be treated, right? It's all based upon the judgment of the superior being, the human being, or in the case of domestic violence, 95% of the crimes are still male on female perpetrators, right? Not female on male or even male on male or female on female. It's 90% of it's still male female under the dominant patriarchal conservative religion, mainly the Abrahamic religions, but most conservative religious groups do have an idea that there are different levels of meritocracy, that certain beings, human beings, have more inherent spiritual and material value than others. And we look at that in the United States of America with the Constitution. All men are created equal, and there was a huge argument then. And of course, there's some correspondence between the Adams family where uh, John Quincy Adams said, "Sorry, honey, you're not equal," and where it ended up with the decision being made through many compromises that European extraction male humans who owned property were all men, and that other people, other humans, were not men, so they were not created equal. So, this is the backdrop for cultural issues of domestic violence or in intimate partner violence um, that uh, the idea that these individual interventions aren't working. So the action that I am thinking of, so the problem, intimate partner or domestic violence, research questions, what are the causes? Um, how, and in this case, as opposed to the other presentation, is what interventions may work with domestic violence. We have a very limited success with domestic violence right now. Most people tend to go back to the relationship where they're being abused or go back to the behavior of a perpetrator if that person comes back or they find a new victim, right? Or the victim finds a new perpetrator. So the cultural acceptance of the activities is the base problem, not the individual neuroses. So what we're going to do is take public school systems. We're going to find 2 public school systems where the demographic has a very close or the same number of domestic violence reports to the police per year per household or by population. And one of these school systems is going to get early relationship training from licensed mental health clinicians, not from people who understand this issue, right? It'll be groups starting in kindergarten through 12th grade of where we have group counseling, how to recognize, create, and maintain healthy, intimate relationships as friends, family, lovers, spouses. And the other one will not get that intervention. So this is a longitudinal study of of two similar populations where the independent variable is in public school counseling regarding recognizing, creating, and maintaining healthy, intimate relationships of all sorts. The data collection will be over the 20 years of the study, annual reviews of the percentage of domestic violence reported to police, not prosecuted, not convicted, all of that, reported to police per 1,000 members of the population, and to see if there's a difference at the end of the 20 years as these young persons become adults and start interacting with each other on legally actionable basis of living together, having children, sharing finances, and sharing responsibility for raising children and sexual relationships. Insurance measures will be very simply quantitative reports on annual police calls to report domestic violence over the next 20 years. Methods will be very simple. It seems like you just check the police records, and the counseling will be relationship counseling, kind of a professional counseling of person-centered, plus the Marshall Rosenberg's idea of nonviolent communication of I statements and listening, and empathy for self, empathy for other. Ethical considerations are the status quo. Since we don't have the information, I guess there's not a lot, because if you have a vast improvement on the independent variable of counseling, that'll prove the status quo is not working. Now, I don't think see, that's tricky, right? Because deliberately did not allow these people access to this free counseling in the public school system. And if they grow up to be perpetrators and victims, is there a moral or legal responsibility for the fact that the quality of their life is going to be lesser because they are on one or the other side of that issue? The analysis is pretty simple, right? The independent variable has a correlation with reduced domestic violence or does not. So that the conclusion will be, I hope, that we can start addressing these cultural issues in young people. As we know, 3 to 7 years old are or 0 to 7, really, the formative years of these underlying cultural issues. So it may be too late to start in kindergarten at 5 years old. But I think that there will be a great reduction in domestic violence if we do the interventions. Now, of course, one thing that's very difficult to address that I didn't really bring up is if you come into a very conservative community and start talking to their 5-year-old children about how to make I statements and stuff, they may see the overarching community may see it as a threat to the stability of the community. And stability is very important. The more conservative group or culture, the more threatening change feels. So it's not that the group would be against fair treatment. It would be that change is dangerous. We've learned how to manage our world. And if you change things, you're going to create unpredictable and dangerous change in the environment, which will harm the community. Therefore, we will not allow this. So so I'm still not addressing that basic cultural issue of how do we change the paradigm from what has been historically for the Western and dominant civilizations who have killed off the happy and egalitarian ones of certain humans are inherently better, more important, spiritually superior to other humans based on uh, perceived gender, race, uh, wealth, and other surface issues. So that's going to be a big issue that needs to be dealt with. So you bring that into a culture who believes the man is the patriarch because God said so, or because that's the way it is, and say, well, the woman and the child have equal spiritual importance. There's going to be a huge threat to the stability of that community. And as the author of Suicide, the Great Study, I forgot his name right now, I'll put it in the comments, said any social change causes a huge uptick in anomic suicide, which is suicide caused by external factors. Again, not by individual neuroses or psychoses. So they studied from 1800 to 1900 suicide throughout Europe and found anytime a culture, a nation state, or a state, or a discrete city had a huge change in financial or social uh, norms, there was a huge uptick in suicide. It didn't matter if a country was totally poor and became wealthy over a very short period of time, huge uptick in suicide. If a country or culture was very controlling and conservative, became liberal, huge uptick in suicide. If the opposite happened, if a very liberal community became more and more conservative, huge uptick in suicide. If a wealthy community became poor, huge uptick in suicide. So humans have a very hard time with change. So as community, so the change from a patriarchy or a hierarchy, either one, right? So where certain people, in the case of the United States of America and probably most of Europe, men who had legal power over certain amounts of terrain, of land, were inherently better, more important, had more rights than anybody else. When you start changing that, you're going to see an uptick in social unrest and actual self-harming of the citizens. So I know I always do this, get involved in these bigger issues. But anyways, I think that those issues notwithstanding, if we can get um, consistent, assertive, preventative counseling on how to recognize, create, and maintain healthy, loving, egalitarian relationships amongst children in schools, that will reduce uh, the incidence of at least police involvement in domestic violence because there will be less of it. Okie dokie.